The last rays of a fiery Colorado sunset scorched across Sophia Nesbit's tear-stained face as she urged her exhausted mare forward, leaving behind the only home she'd ever known. The town of Whiteridge was already fading into the distance, its church spire barely visible against the darkening sky of 1878, a place where she'd once been respected as the schoolteacher, now reduced to cruel whispers and condemning glares. Her reputation lay in tatters behind her, along with her heart. She had been riding for nearly 6 hours, stopping only briefly to water her horse at a stream. Her muscles ached and her eyes stung, but the pain of betrayal burned far worse than any physical discomfort. The accusations, the lies, they had spread through town like wildfire. No one had stood up for her, not even those she considered friends, not even her father. "Just a little farther, Penny," she whispered to her mare, patting the horse's neck with a trembling hand. "We'll find somewhere to rest soon." The distant sound of hoofbeats made her blood run cold. Someone was following her. Panic surged through her veins as she glanced behind, squinting into the gathering darkness. A lone rider approached, his silhouette growing larger against the twilight sky. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as she nudged Penny into a faster trot, ignoring the mare's weary protest. But the rider was closing in, his horse fresher and stronger than her tired mount. "Miss Nesbit," the man's voice carried on the wind. "Miss Nesbit, please wait." She recognized that voice deep, with a slight drawl that wasn't native to Colorado. Matthew Calloway, the newcomer to Whiteridge who had arrived just 3 months ago with his small herd of cattle and quiet ways. The man who nodded politely when they passed in town but rarely spoke more than a few words. Sophia slowed her horse, indecision warring within her. Matthew Calloway had never been unkind to her, but she trusted no one from Whiteridge now. He rode up alongside her, his bay stallion easily matching Penny's tired pace. In the fading light, she could make out his features' strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes the color of stormy skies beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his weathered face. "Your horse is about done in," he said simply, nodding toward Penny. "There's a decent camping spot about a mile ahead by the creek." Sophia stiffened. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice raw from crying. "If that's why you've come, it isn't." His gaze remained fixed on the trail ahead. "You're headed west, so am I." "Why?" Suspicion tightened her throat. "Did someone send you to bring me back?" Matthew shook his head. "No, madam. I was planning to leave anyway." "Why would you leave your cattle, your land?" she pressed. "Wasn't much holding me there," he said, then fell silent. They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the creaking of saddle leather and the soft footfalls of their horses on the packed dirt trail. Sophia studied him from the corner of her eye, noting the rifle strapped to his saddle, the way he sat tall and alert despite the long hours of riding. "That creek's just ahead," he finally said, pointing to a line of cottonwoods silhouetted against the night sky. "Good water, sheltered spot." Sophia hesitated. Every instinct told her to be wary, but exhaustion was overtaking her and Penny couldn't go much farther without rest. "I can make my own camp, Mr. Calloway." The corner of his mouth quirked up slightly. "Never suggested otherwise, Miss Nesbit." When they reached the creek, Matthew dismounted with easy grace, leading his horse to water. Sophia climbed stiffly from her saddle, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "I'll gather some firewood," Matthew said, not commenting on her unsteadiness. "Creek water's clean here." While he disappeared into the darkness, Sophia unsaddled Penny, rubbing down the mare with handfuls of grass. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced. What was Matthew Calloway really doing here? Why would he leave Whiteridge the same day she fled? The coincidence seemed too great. By the time he returned with an armload of deadwood, she had spread her bedroll beneath a cottonwood tree, keeping a respectable distance from where he had left his saddle. "I don't need your help," she said as he expertly arranged the wood for a fire, "and I don't need your protection." "Never said you did." He struck a match, the small flame illuminating his face momentarily before catching the kindling. "But 2 riders are safer than 1 in these parts." I have my father's pistol, she said, hand moving instinctively to the weapon tucked into her saddlebag. Good. Know how to use it, her silence answered for her. Matthew nodded slightly. Could teach you, might come in handy. Why would you do that? Sophia asked, the question that had been burning inside her finally spilling out. Why follow me at all? You don't even know me. Don't need to know you to see an injustice, he said simply, feeding the growing fire with larger sticks. What happened back there wasn't right. Sophia felt her throat tighten. You don't know what happened. Know enough. He settled back on his heels, the firelight dancing across his features. Know you taught those children better than anyone before you. Know you're not what they're saying. Tears threatened again, but she blinked them away fiercely. And how would you know that, Mr. Calloway? Been watching. Listening, he shrugged. I make it my business to know who's decent and who isn't. The fire crackled between them as Sophia digested his words. After a moment, Matthew rose and walked to his horse, returning with a small coffee pot and a packet wrapped in oilcloth. Got coffee and jerky if you're hungry, he offered, not looking at her directly, giving her the space to compose herself. Her stomach growled traitorously, reminding her she hadn't eaten since early morning. Thank you, she said stiffly. As Matthew busied himself preparing the coffee, Sophia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The night was growing cold, stars pricking the vast expanse of sky above them. Where are you headed? He asked after several minutes of silence. Denver, maybe, or farther west. She hadn't really planned beyond escape. Somewhere I can start over, where no one knows me, Matthew nodded. Denver's a good place to disappear, plenty of work for a schoolteacher. No one will hire a schoolteacher with no references, Sophia said bitterly. No one will want a woman with my reputation. Your reputation got left behind in Whitridge, Matthew said firmly. What matters is what you build from here. Sophia accepted the tin cup of coffee he offered, their fingers brushing briefly. You sound like you've done this before, Mr. Calloway. A shadow crossed his face. Once or twice. Are you running from something too? She asked, curiosity temporarily overriding her caution. Not running, just moving on. He took a sip of his coffee, grimacing slightly at the bitterness. There's a difference. And what is that difference? Sophia challenged. Running means looking back, moving on means facing forward. His eyes met hers across the fire. Which are you doing, Miss Nesbit? The question struck her like a physical blow. Was she running or moving forward? The shame and humiliation still burned fresh in her mind, the whispers as she walked down the street, Mrs. Thornton pulling her children away as if Sophia carried something contagious. Reverend Miller's sermon on fallen women that everyone knew was directed at her. I don't know, she admitted softly. Matthew nodded as if her answer satisfied him. Well, either way, Denver's 3 days' ride if we take it easy on the horses, longer if we encounter trouble. Sophia raised an eyebrow. I haven't agreed to travel with you, Mr. Calloway. No, you haven't. He pulled out a pouch of tobacco and began to roll a cigarette with practiced fingers. But the offer stands, trail's dangerous for a lone woman. And how do I know you're not dangerous? She asked pointedly. Matthew lit his cigarette and drew deeply before answering. You don't, just like I don't know if you can shoot that pistol you're clutching under your blanket right now. Sophia flushed, loosening her grip on the gun she'd indeed been holding beneath the folds of her bedroll. Get some sleep, Miss Nesbit, he said, exhaling a stream of smoke. I'll take first watch. I didn't agree. You can decide in the morning, he cut her off gently. Everything looks clearer in daylight. Despite her determination to stay alert, exhaustion soon overwhelmed Sophia. The last thing she remembered was watching Matthew's silhouette against the stars as he sat vigil by the dying fire, his rifle across his knees. She woke to the aroma of coffee and the soft sounds of morning. The sun had just crested the eastern horizon, painting the sky in delicate pinks and golds. Matthew was already up, tending a fresh fire and frying something in a small cast iron pan. Morning, he said without looking up. Hope you like rabbit, caught one in a snare before sunrise. Sophia sat up, disoriented for a moment before the events of yesterday came flooding back. She quickly smoothed her tangled hair, acutely aware of her rumpled appearance. You should have woken me for my watch, she said, embarrassed that she had slept through the night while he kept guard. Matthew shrugged. Wasn't tired. That's not the point. What is the point, Miss Nesbit? He flipped the rabbit meat in the pan. That you don't want to feel beholden, or that you don't trust me enough to sleep when I'm awake. His directness took her aback. Both, I suppose. Fair enough. He nodded toward the creek. Water's cold but clean if you want to wash up. Food'll be ready in a few minutes. Grateful for the chance to refresh herself, Sophia gathered her small bag of toiletries and headed to the creek. The icy water shocked her fully awake as she splashed her face and rinsed her mouth. Glancing at her reflection in the calm surface, she hardly recognized herself, eyes shadowed with fatigue, hair falling loose from its pins. A smudge of dirt across one cheek. This was not the prim schoolteacher of Whiteridge, the woman who had worn starched collars and kept every hair in place. This was someone new, someone she didn't yet know. When she returned to camp, Matthew had divided the rabbit onto 2 tin plates, adding some hardtack biscuits from his supplies. It's not fancy, he said, offering her a plate, but it'll keep your strength up. Thank you. Sophia sat on a fallen log and took a tentative bite. The meat was surprisingly tender, seasoned with salt and some herb she couldn't identify. This is good. My mother taught me to cook, he said, a brief smile warming his usually serious face. Said no man should depend on a woman for his meals. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. The past tense hung between them, but Sophia didn't press. They ate in companionable silence, the morning birds calling from the cottonwoods and the creek gurgling softly nearby. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil Sophia had left behind. I've made my decision, she said finally, setting aside her empty plate. I'll travel with you to Denver. Before he could respond, she added firmly, but I pay my own way. I'll cook, stand watch, whatever needs doing. I'm not looking for charity or protection. Matthew studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Understood. We'll leave when you're ready. Within the hour, they had packed their meager camp and saddled the horses. Sophia was grateful to see that Penny seemed refreshed after the night's rest, prancing a little as she mounted. We'll follow the creek west for a while, Matthew explained, checking his saddle cinch. Better water for the horses and the terrain's easier. As they rode side by side through the morning sunshine, Sophia felt a curious lightness despite the circumstances of her flight. There was something liberating about leaving everything behind, about being accountable to no one but herself. Mr. Calloway, she said after they had ridden in silence for nearly an hour. May I ask why you really left Whiteridge? You had land, cattle. Matthew didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Some places aren't meant for staying, he said finally. I recognized that about Whiteridge early on, because of what happened to me, partly. He adjusted his hat against the rising sun. A town that turns on its own so quickly isn't a place I want to build a life. I wasn't its own, Sophia said bitterly. I only came to Whiteridge 2 years ago. I was always the outsider. 2 years is long enough to know someone's character. Matthew's voice hardened slightly. Those people were quick to believe the worst without evidence. That tells me all I need to know about them. Sophia's hands tightened on her reins. You speak as if you know what happened. I know enough, he repeated his words from the previous night. I know Gregory Blackwell is a liar who couldn't accept that you refused his advances. Shock rippled through her. How could you possibly know that? Matthew's expression remained neutral. Small towns have big ears. I heard him bragging to his friends at the saloon about how he'd teach the uppity schoolteacher a lesson. Next thing I know, there's rumors about you and some married man. He glanced at her. Wasn't hard to piece together. Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes. No one else seemed to make that connection. People believe what's convenient, he said simply. And scandal is always more interesting than truth. They rode in silence for several miles, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats matching the tumult of Sophia's thoughts. Matthew knew more about her situation than she had realized, yet he hadn't judged her. Instead, he had chosen to leave town rather than remain in a community capable of such cruelty. Thank you, she said finally, for believing me when no one else did. Matthew nodded once, saying nothing more. But something had shifted between them, a tentative trust beginning to form across the gulf of their different circumstances. As the day wore on, the terrain gradually changed, the gentle hills giving way to more rugged country. By mid-afternoon, they had left the creek behind and were traversing a rocky landscape dotted with pinyon pines and juniper. "We'll make camp early today," Matthew announced, pointing to a sheltered hollow ahead. "Storm brewing." Sophia followed his gaze to the western horizon, where dark clouds were indeed gathering. "How can you tell it will hit us? It looks far away, winds changing, smell in the air." He glanced at her. "Spent enough time outdoors to know the signs." Sure enough, by the time they had made camp and secured the horses, the wind had picked up considerably, carrying the distinct scent of rain. Matthew worked quickly to construct a crude shelter using a canvas tarp from his pack, anchoring it between trees to create a protected space. "Not much, but it'll keep the worst of the rain off," he explained, weighing down the corners with rocks. "Get your bedroll under here, I'll gather more wood before it hits." Sophia busied herself organizing their small camp, grateful for the tasks that kept her mind occupied. She was arranging stones for a fire ring when the first fat drops of rain began to fall, quickly intensifying into a steady downpour. Matthew returned moments later, arms laden with wood, his coat already soaked through. "This should last us," he said, stacking the wood under the edge of the shelter. "If we're careful, you're drenched," Sophia observed. "You should change into something dry." "This'll dry soon enough," he said, but a violent shiver belied his words. "Don't be foolish, Mr. Calloway," she chided, falling into her schoolteacher tone without thinking. "You'll catch your death. I'll turn my back while you change." A fleeting smile crossed his face, but he nodded, reaching for his saddlebag. Sophia kept her promise, focusing intently on starting the fire with the matches he had left her. Behind her, she could hear the rustle of fabric as he changed his shirt, trying not to think about the impropriety of their situation. "Decent now," he said after a moment. When she turned, she saw he had indeed changed his shirt but still wore his damp trousers. His hair was plastered to his forehead, droplets of water clinging to his eyelashes. "Here," she said impulsively, pulling a clean handkerchief from her pocket, "for your face." Their fingers brushed as he took it, a jolt of awareness passing between them that had nothing to do with the electricity in the storm-laden air. "Much obliged," he said softly, his eyes holding hers for a beat longer than necessary. Sophia looked away first, suddenly flustered. "I'll see what we can manage for supper." The storm raged through the evening, lightning splitting the sky and thunder rolling across the hills. Huddled beneath their makeshift shelter, they shared a meager meal of jerky and hardtack, supplemented with the last of Matthew's coffee. "My father always said a storm like this cleansed the land," Sophia remarked, watching raindrops cascade from the edge of the tarp. "Washed away the old to make way for the new." "Wise man, your father," Matthew said, "though I reckon he's not too pleased with you right now." Sophia's expression clouded. "He chose to believe the worst of me, said I had brought shame to the family name." Her voice caught. "He gave me 24 hours to leave town or he would disown me publicly." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Some fathers aren't worthy of the name." "He wasn't always like that," Sophia said defensively, then sighed. "But he's changed since my mother died, harder, more concerned with what others think, still no excuse." Matthew's voice was gentle despite his harsh words. "A father should stand by his daughter no matter what." "Is that what your father did?" she asked. "Stand by you," a shadow crossed his face. "My father died when I was 12, lynched by a mob who decided he must have stolen another man's horse." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Sophia could hear the old pain beneath it. "They found the real thief 2 days later, but my father was already cold in the ground." "I'm so sorry," Sophia whispered, horrified. "It was a long time ago," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "But it taught me something about mobs and rumors and how quickly people turn on their neighbors." "Is that why you left Whiteridge? Because it reminded you of that?" "Partly." He poked at the small fire. "Mostly I left because I couldn't stomach watching them destroy a good woman for no reason." Sophia looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. I'm not as good as you think, Mr. Calloway. I did consider Gregory Blackwell's courtship briefly before I realized what kind of man he was. Considering a man's courtship isn't a crime, Miss Nesbit, nor is rejecting it. His eyes met hers across the fire. You have nothing to be ashamed of. The things they said about me, she couldn't finish, the humiliation still too raw, were lies, he said firmly, and anyone with sense knows it. The conviction in his voice warmed something inside her that had been cold since the whispers began. Thank you, she said softly. Matthew nodded once, then changed the subject. If the weather clears, we should reach Sterling by tomorrow evening. We can resupply there. Sterling. Sophia frowned. I thought we were heading to Denver. We are, he assured her, but Sterling's on the way. Decent little town from what I hear. We can get fresh provisions, maybe a hot meal and proper beds for the night. The thought of a real bed and hot food was tantalizing after their rough camp. That sounds wonderful. Just keep your hat low and don't use your real name, he advised. Small towns talk and news travels. You think word of my disgrace might have reached Sterling. The idea hadn't occurred to Sophia, and it sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. Probably not, he said, but caution costs nothing. The storm continued through the night, forcing them to sleep closer to the fire and to each other than propriety would normally allow. Sophia lay awake for hours, listening to the rain and to Matthew's steady breathing nearby, wondering how her life had changed so dramatically in the span of 2 days. She had gone from respected schoolteacher to disgraced outcast to fugitive, riding across the wilderness with a man she barely knew. Yet somehow, in Matthew Calloway's quiet presence, she felt safer than she had in Whiteridge during those final terrible days. Morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having washed the world clean. Puddles dotted the ground, reflecting the blue sky like scattered mirrors. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, fresh and invigorating. Perfect traveling weather, Matthew commented as they broke camp. Ground'll be muddy, but the horses can manage. They made good time despite the soggy conditions, stopping only briefly at midday to rest the horses and share a cold meal. By late afternoon, the terrain had changed again, opening into rolling grasslands with the small settlement of Sterling visible in the distance. Remember, Matthew said as they approached the outskirts of town, keep to yourself, no need to invite questions. Sophia nodded, pulling her hat lower to shadow her face. She had pinned her hair up and donned a plain brown riding coat that had belonged to her mother, making her look more like a farmer's wife than a schoolteacher. Sterling proved to be little more than a wide spot in the trail, a general store, livery stable, small hotel, and saloon making up the entirety of its business district. But after days on the trail, it looked like paradise to Sophia's weary eyes. I'll see about rooms at the hotel, Matthew said as they dismounted in front of the livery. You wait here with the horses. Sophia watched him stride across the muddy street, his tall figure drawing curious glances from the locals. She suddenly realized how they must appear a man and woman traveling alone, unmarried. The very thing she had been accused of in Whiteridge. When Matthew returned, his expression was grim. Hotel's full, he said quietly. Trail boss came through with his crew yesterday, took every room. Disappointment crashed through Sophia. So we camp again tonight? Not necessarily. Matthew hesitated. Livery owner says we can sleep in the hayloft for 2 bits. It's dry and safe, better than camping in the mud. Sophia bit her lip. Sharing a hayloft with Matthew pushed the boundaries of propriety even further, but the thought of another night on the damp ground was deeply unappealing. Will there be privacy? She asked delicately. He says there are a couple of stalls up there, separated by a partition. Not much, but better than nothing. Matthew studied her face. It's your decision, Miss Nesbit. We can ride on if you prefer. Sophia squared her shoulders. The hayloft will be fine, she decided. After all, I left propriety behind in Whiteridge, did I not? A hint of a smile touched Matthew's lips. Don't think propriety has anything to do with right and wrong myself. Nor do I anymore, she admitted. Once they had settled the horses and arranged their sparse belongings in the hayloft, Matthew suggested they visit the general store before it closed. We need supplies, he pointed out. And I reckon we could both use something fresh to eat. The general store was blessedly empty apart from the proprietor, a heavy-set man with mutton chop whiskers who barely looked up from his ledger as they entered. Sophia wandered the narrow aisles while Matthew negotiated for coffee, flour, and bacon. Her attention was caught by a display of hair ribbons, a frivolous item she certainly didn't need. But the bright splash of blue silk against the utilitarian surroundings called to something inside her a reminder that beauty still existed in a world that had recently shown her only its ugliness. "Get it if you want it," Matthew said quietly, appearing at her elbow. Sophia startled. "It's foolish," she said, dropping her hand, "an unnecessary expense. Not everything worthwhile is necessary." He reached past her and picked up the ribbon, adding it to their purchases before she could protest further. Outside the store, dusk was falling, painting the humble buildings of sterling in soft lavender and gold. The saloon across the street was coming to life, piano music and laughter spilling from its swinging doors. "Hungry?" Matthew asked, nodding toward the saloon. "They'll likely have hot food." Sophia hesitated. A respectable woman would never enter such an establishment. But she was no longer bound by Whiteridge's standards, and her stomach growled at the thought of a proper meal. "Yes," she decided, "I am hungry." If Matthew was surprised by her acquiescence, he didn't show it. He simply offered his arm in a gesture of unexpected gallantry. "Stay close," he said as they crossed the street, "and let me do the talking." The saloon was busy but not crowded, the early evening crowd consisting mostly of local men unwinding after a day's work. Heads turned as they entered, curious eyes taking in the strangers, lingering particularly on Sophia. Matthew guided her to a small table in the corner, positioning himself so that she was partially shielded from view. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They'll lose interest soon enough." A harried-looking woman in a faded dress approached their table. "What'll it be?" "Whatever's hot for supper," Matthew replied, placing a coin on the table. "And 2 coffees." The woman nodded briskly and disappeared toward the kitchen. Sophia removed her hat but kept her head lowered, acutely aware of the sidelong glances from the other patrons. "This was perhaps not the wisest choice," she whispered. "You need a proper meal," Matthew said firmly, "and you've every right to be here." Before she could respond, the batwing doors swung open and a group of trail hands entered, bringing with them a blast of cool, evening air and boisterous laughter. Sophia tensed, something about their rowdy demeanor setting her on edge. Matthew noticed her discomfort. "We'll eat quickly and go," he promised. Their food arrived, a surprisingly appetizing stew with biscuits, and Sophia ate hungrily, trying to ignore the increasingly loud group at the bar. But fate was not on their side. As they were finishing their meal, one of the cowboys staggered toward their table, his eyes fixed on Sophia with drunken interest. "Well, ain't you a pretty little thing?" he slurred, bracing himself against their table. "What's a fine lady like you doing in a place like this?" "Move along, friend," Matthew said, his voice low but carrying a clear warning. "The lady's not interested in conversation." The cowboy straightened, bleary eyes narrowing as they focused on Matthew. "Wasn't talking to you, mister. Nevertheless, that's my answer." Matthew remained seated, but Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders. "Why don't you let the lady speak for herself?" The cowboy turned back to Sophia, his alcohol-soured breath washing over her. "What do you say, darlin'? Want some company better than this trail bum?" Before Sophia could respond, Matthew was on his feet, moving with a speed that belied his relaxed posture of moments before. His hand closed around the cowboy's wrist, turning him firmly but not violently away from the table. "Time for you to go back to your friends," Matthew said, his voice still calm but with an edge that made Sophia shiver. The cowboy tried to wrench free, but Matthew's grip held firm. A dangerous moment hung in the air, then one of the other trail hands called out, "Come on, Pete, leave the lady be. Your whiskey's getting warm." After a tense second, the cowboy Pete pulled his arm free and backed away, muttering curses under his breath. Matthew watched him return to the bar before sitting down again. "We should go," he said quietly. Sophia nodded, her appetite gone. They left quickly, Matthew placing his body between her and the bar as they made their way to the door. Outside, the night air was blessedly cool against her flushed face. "I'm sorry about that," Matthew said as they walked back toward the livery. "Should have known better than to take you there." "It wasn't your fault," Sophia assured him. "And I'm glad to have had a hot meal, despite the unpleasantness." When they reached the livery, the building was dark and quiet, the owner having retired to his quarters attached to the rear of the stable. They climbed the ladder to the hayloft, where their bedrolls lay on opposite sides of the rough wooden partition. "Try to get some sleep," Matthew advised, lighting a small lantern he had purchased at the general store. "We'll leave at first light." Sophia nodded, suddenly shy in the intimate setting. "Good night, Mr. Calloway." "Matthew," he said abruptly. "After all this, you might as well use my given name." A small smile touched her lips. "Then you must call me Sophia." "Sophia," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "It suits you. Good night." She retreated to her side of the partition, changing quickly into her nightdress and wrapping herself in her blanket. The hay was surprisingly comfortable, certainly better than the hard ground of their previous camps. Sleep eluded her, however, her mind replaying the incident in the saloon. Matthew had defended her without violence or unnecessary drama, his quiet authority diffusing a situation that could have escalated dangerously. It was a stark contrast to Gregory Blackwell's peacock posturing back in Whiteridge. She was still awake when she heard the ladder creak sometime later. Footsteps, multiple sets, moved stealthily across the wooden floor of the loft. "Well, looky here," a familiar slurred voice said. "Told you they'd be up here." Sophia froze in terror as Pete and two other cowboys from the saloon peered over the partition at her. She clutched her blanket tighter, frantically looking for Matthew but seeing no sign of him. "Your boyfriend ain't here, darlin'," Pete sneered, as if reading her thoughts. "Saw him heading to the outhouse, figured we'd have us a little chat while he's occupied." "Leave immediately," Sophia commanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart, "or I'll scream." "Now that ain't friendly," one of the other men said, stepping closer. "We just want to talk, maybe get to know you better." "My father's pistol is right here," she lied, reaching beside her as if to grab a weapon. "And I assure you I know how to use it." The men hesitated, exchanging glances. Before they could decide whether to call her bluff, a cold voice spoke from the shadows. "She won't need a pistol," Matthew said, "because you three are leaving. Now." Sophia nearly sagged with relief as Matthew stepped into view, his rifle leveled casually but unmistakably at the intruders. "This ain't your business," Pete blustered, though his bravado was visibly deflating. "She's under my protection," Matthew stated simply. "That makes it my business. Now go before this gets ugly." For a tense moment, Sophia thought the men might challenge him. Then Pete spat on the floor and gestured to his companions. "Ain't worth the trouble. Come on, boys." They retreated down the ladder, muttering curses. Matthew waited until their footsteps faded before lowering his rifle. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etching lines around his eyes. Sophia nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "Yes, thank you. I shouldn't have left," he said grimly. "I'm sorry." "You couldn't have known they would follow us." She hesitated. "How did you get back without them seeing you?" A fleeting smile crossed his face. "Back way in." "Livery owner showed me earlier." The smile faded. "We should leave tonight. Those men will likely be looking for trouble when they sober up." "Now, in the dark, moon's bright enough," Matthew said, "and I don't trust them not to return with more friends." Despite her exhaustion, Sophia saw the wisdom in his suggestion. "Very well. Give me a moment to dress." Within 20 minutes, they had saddled their horses and slipped quietly out of Sterling, riding north by the light of a nearly full moon. The town quickly fell behind them, its few lights winking out in the distance. "I'm sorry your first town stop was so unpleasant," Matthew said after they had ridden for nearly an hour. "Not all places are like that." "It wasn't all unpleasant," Sophia replied, thinking of the hot meal and the blue ribbon now tucked safely in her pocket. "And I'm learning that the world outside Whiteridge is complicated." "That it is," he agreed. "Good and bad everywhere, often side by side." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional cry of a night bird. The landscape was silvered by moonlight, beautiful in an eerie, otherworldly way. Matthew, Sophia said eventually, the use of his given name still unfamiliar on her tongue. May I ask you something personal? You can ask, he said, a hint of wariness in his tone. Why do you really care what happens to me? She had been wondering this since he first appeared on the trail behind her. You hardly know me, yet you've risked much on my behalf. Matthew didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if the answer might be written there. When I was 16, he said finally, my sister found herself in a situation not unlike yours, accused of impropriety with the local doctor's son. Sophia waited, sensing there was more to the story. Nobody stood up for her, he continued, his voice rougher now. Not even me. I was too young, too scared of the consequences. His hands tightened on his reins. She left town in the middle of the night. I never saw her again. I'm so sorry, Sophia whispered, understanding dawning. You're helping me because you couldn't help her. Partly, he admitted. But also because it's the right thing to do, and because... He trailed off, because... Matthew turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Because from the first day I saw you teaching those children under the oak tree outside the schoolhouse, I knew you were someone worth knowing. His simple honesty touched something deep inside her. I noticed you too, she confessed. You always tipped your hat when we passed on the street, even when others began to avoid me. Common courtesy costs nothing, he said, but there was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. They rode on through the night, stopping briefly to rest the horses before continuing at dawn. The day passed in a blur of dusty trails and wide open spaces, each mile putting more distance between them and the troubles behind them. By late afternoon, they had reached a small river, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows offering welcome shade after hours in the sun. Good place to camp, Matthew decided, dismounting with a grimace that betrayed his weariness. Plenty of water, fish for supper if we're lucky. Sophia slid from Penny's back, her legs stiff and sore. I could sleep for a week, she admitted, stretching her aching muscles. Rough couple of days, he agreed, but we've made good time. Another 2 days' ride should bring us to Denver. The word hung between them, a reminder that their journey and perhaps their companionship had a finite end. Sophia was surprised by the pang of regret this realization brought. What will you do in Denver? She asked as they began setting up camp. Matthew shrugged, unsaddling his horse with practiced ease. Fine work, I expect. I've done a bit of everything ranch hand, minor, even some carpentry. A man of many talents, Sophia observed with a small smile. Jack of all trades, master of none, he replied, but returned her smile. What about you? Still planning to teach? The question gave Sophia pause. She had been so focused on escape that she hadn't truly considered what came next. I don't know, she admitted. Teaching is all I know, but without references. Denver's growing fast. They need teachers. Matthew began gathering wood for a fire. Someone will give you a chance. His confidence in her was touching, but Sophia wasn't so sure. Perhaps I'll try something entirely different. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I could work in a shop or become a seamstress. Could do anything you set your mind to, Matthew agreed, arranging the wood in a careful pile. As they worked together to establish their camp, Sophia found herself watching Matthew surreptitiously. Over the past days, she had come to appreciate not only his quiet strength, but also his inherent decency. He was unlike any man she had known, straightforward yet gentle, capable yet unassuming. I'll try for those fish, he said once the fire was going, saw some promising pools downstream. I'll prepare the rest of supper, Sophia offered, reaching for their meager supplies. When Matthew returned an hour later with 3 decent-sized trout, Sophia had coffee brewing and biscuit dough ready to cook in the small skillet they had purchased in Sterling. Looks like we make a good team, he commented, setting about cleaning his catch. We do, she agreed, surprising herself with how natural it felt to work alongside him. Supper that night was the best they had enjoyed on the trail: fresh fish, hot biscuits, and the last of the dried apples from their provisions. As they ate beside the crackling fire, Sophia felt a contentment that seemed out of place given the circumstances of their journey. "A penny for your thoughts," Matthew said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking how strange life is," she replied. "A week ago, I was teaching children about geography and arithmetic, certain of my place in the world. Now here I am, miles from anywhere, cooking fish over a campfire with a man I barely knew then." "Regrets?" he asked, his tone careful. "Oddly, no." Sophia looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "I miss teaching, and I'm angry about the injustice of what happened. But there's a freedom in this that I've never known before." Matthew nodded. "Open sky has a way of putting things in perspective." "It does," she agreed, "though I admit I'm looking forward to a proper bath and a real bed in Denver." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the river's gentle murmur and the occasional pop from the fire. After a while, Matthew reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Almost forgot," he said, holding it out to her. "Got this in sterling before the unpleasantness." Sophia accepted the package with surprise. "What is it?" "Open it and see." Inside was a small book of poetry Wordsworth, well worn but intact. Sophia ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond measure by the thoughtful gift. "I noticed you had a volume of his work in your satchel," Matthew explained, looking slightly embarrassed by her emotional reaction. "Figured you might like something new to read on the trail." "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." "It's nothing," he demurred, but pleased by her reaction. "No, it's everything," Sophia insisted. "To see me, to notice what would bring me joy in the midst of all this. It means a great deal." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first night on the trail. Matthew looked away first, clearing his throat. "Should get some sleep," he said, rising to his feet. "Long ride tomorrow." Sophia nodded, understanding his retreat, but feeling a twinge of disappointment nonetheless. "Good night, Matthew." "Good night, Sophia." As she settled into her bedroll, the book of poetry clutched to her chest. Sophia realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Matthew Calloway. The thought should have frightened her, given her recent experiences and uncertain future, but instead it filled her with a quiet hope she hadn't dared feel since leaving Whiteridge. The next morning dawned clear and warm, promising another beautiful day for travel. They broke camp efficiently, the routine now familiar after several days on the trail together. "River leads to a trading post about 10 miles from here," Matthew said as they mounted up. "We can rest the horses there, maybe get a hot meal." "That sounds lovely," Sophia agreed. She had slept poorly, her mind too full of confusing emotions to find rest. As they rode, Matthew pointed out landmarks and wildlife, seemingly more talkative than usual. Sophia responded in kind, grateful for the distraction from her tumultuous thoughts. They reached the trading post by midday, a sturdy log building surrounded by a few smaller structures, situated where the river crossed an established trail. Several wagons were gathered outside, their owners trading goods or simply taking a break from the journey. "Stay close," Matthew advised as they dismounted. "Place looks decent enough, but better safe than sorry after Sterling." Inside, the trading post was surprisingly well stocked, with goods ranging from basic provisions to small luxuries. A heavy-set woman with iron-gray hair presided over a pot of stew at the back, selling bowls to hungry travelers. "Two, please," Matthew requested, placing coins on the rough wooden counter. The woman eyed them curiously, but asked no questions as she ladled generous portions into tin bowls. "Bread's extra," she said, indicating a loaf nearby. "We'll take some," Matthew agreed, adding another coin. They found a relatively quiet corner to eat, grateful for the hot food after their simple trail breakfasts. The stew was hearty and flavorful, the bread fresh enough to suggest it had been baked that morning. "This is wonderful," Sophia sighed, savoring each bite. "Best meal since we left," Matthew agreed. "Though your trail cooking isn't far behind." Sophia smiled at the compliment. High praise from someone who learned from his mother. As they ate, Sophia noticed a man at a nearby table watching them with undisguised interest. He was well dressed for the frontier, his coat of good quality and his boots polished despite the dusty surroundings. Matthew noticed her discomfort. "Problem? That man is staring," she murmured, nodding slightly in the stranger's direction. Matthew glanced over, his expression neutral. "Probably just curious about newcomers. Try to ignore him." But the man stood and approached their table, hat in hand. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, his accent marking him as educated, possibly Eastern. "But I couldn't help noticing the lady's book." Sophia glanced down in surprise. She had indeed placed her new volume of Wordsworth on the table beside her bowl. "Fine choice of poetry," the stranger continued. "Wordsworth is a particular favorite of mine." "Mine as well," Sophia replied cautiously. The man smiled, revealing even white teeth. "Edward Thornton," he introduced himself with a slight bow, "at your service." "Pleasure," Matthew said noncommittally, not offering their names in return. Mr. Thornton seemed undeterred by the cool reception. "I'm headed to Denver myself," he continued. "Establishing a new academy there, we're seeking qualified instructors." His gaze lingered on Sophia. "Your appreciation for literature suggests you might be educated, madam." "Are you by chance a teacher?" Sophia froze, torn between excitement at the prospect of employment and wariness at revealing her background. Matthew answered for her. "My wife has taught, yes," he said smoothly, placing his hand over hers on the table. "But we're not looking for positions at present. Wife." The word sent a jolt through Sophia, but she managed to maintain her composure, even squeezing Matthew's hand in apparent affection. "A pity," Mr. Thornton said, though his smile remained fixed. "Should you reconsider, the Denver Academy for Young Ladies will be opening next month. We offer competitive wages and housing for our instructors." He placed a printed card on the table. "My card, should you change your mind." With another small bow, he retreated to his own table. Sophia waited until he was out of earshot before whispering, "Wife." Matthew withdrew his hand, looking slightly abashed. Seemed safer than the truth. Traveling companions invite more questions than a married couple. "It was quick thinking," she acknowledged, trying to ignore the lingering warmth where his hand had covered hers. "Might be a legitimate opportunity," Matthew nodded toward the card. "Worth considering when we reach Denver." Sophia slipped the card into her pocket, her mind racing with possibilities. A teaching position at a new academy could be the fresh start she needed, a chance to rebuild her life and reputation. They finished their meal and spent some time replenishing their supplies before continuing their journey. As they rode away from the trading post, Sophia found herself considering Matthew's casual claim that she was his wife. The deception had come so naturally to him, and she had played along without hesitation. What did that mean for the growing feelings between them? The afternoon stretched into evening, the miles passing in companionable conversation interspersed with comfortable silences. They made camp by a small stream, their routine now so well established that few words were needed as they tended the horses, built a fire, and prepared a simple supper. After they had eaten, Sophia took out her new book of poetry, running her fingers over the worn leather binding. "Would you like me to read some?" she offered. Matthew looked surprised but pleased. "I'd like that." Sophia opened to a page at random and began to read, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man." As she read, Matthew watched her, his expression unguarded in a way she had rarely seen. When she finished the poem, he remained silent as if under a spell. "That was beautiful," he said finally. "You've a gift for reading aloud. Years of practice with restless children," she smiled. "Though I confess I always loved poetry even before I became a teacher." "Read another," he requested. Sophia turned the pages, searching for a particular poem. "She was a phantom of delight when first she gleamed upon my sight," she began, acutely aware of the word's meaning as she read about a woman who seemed at first ethereal but proved to be human, warm, and real. When she finished, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken emotions. Matthew's eyes held hers across the fire, dark and intent. Sophia, he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. Yes, he rose suddenly, moving around the fire to sit beside her on the fallen log she had claimed as a seat. I'm not good with words like your poet, he said quietly. But I need to tell you something. Sophia's heart raced as she waited for him to continue. These past days with you, he said slowly, have been the best I've known in a long time, maybe ever. For me too, she admitted softly. I know we're both running from something, he continued. And I know Denver was meant to be the end of our journey together. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers, but I find myself hoping it might be just the beginning. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying, Matthew? I'm saying I care for you, he said simply. More than I thought possible in so short a time, and when we reach Denver, I'd like the chance to court you properly, if you'll allow it. Joy blossomed in Sophia's chest, bright and unexpected. I would like that very much, she whispered. Matthew's smile transformed his face, softening the lines carved by years of hardship. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Sophia responded with a tenderness that surprised even her hand rising to rest against his cheek. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise of something deeper to come. When they parted, Matthew rested his forehead against hers for a moment. Been wanting to do that since Sterling, he confessed. Sophia laughed softly. Even with my hair full of hay and my dress covered in trail dust, especially then, he said, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, never seen anyone more beautiful. They sat together by the fire until it burned low, talking of small things and large their childhoods, their hopes for the future, the books they had read and places they had seen. When they finally retired to their separate bedrolls, Sophia felt as if she were floating on air, her troubles temporarily forgotten in the glow of new love. Morning came with a golden sunrise that painted the landscape in hues of amber and rose. Sophia woke feeling refreshed despite the hard ground beneath her, the memory of Matthew's kiss bringing a smile to her lips before she even opened her eyes. He was already up, tending the horses with quiet efficiency. When he saw her stirring, he offered a smile that made her heart skip. Morning, he called. Coffee's hot. They broke camp quickly, eager to be on their way. Denver was now just a day's ride away, and both were anxious to reach civilization, though for different reasons than when they had started their journey. As they rode, Matthew pointed out landmarks, his knowledge of the terrain impressive for someone who had never traveled this route before. How do you know this country so well? Sophia asked, guiding Penny around a patch of loose stones. Maps, he replied. Always studied them whenever I could get my hands on one, and I listen when others talk about their travels. You're a man of hidden depths, Matthew Calloway, she observed. He smiled at that. Not so hidden to you anymore, I reckon. Their path took them through increasingly settled country, with occasional farms and small homesteads dotting the landscape. By mid-afternoon, they encountered more travelers on the trail wagons loaded with goods, lone riders, even a stagecoach that rattled past in a cloud of dust. Getting close now, Matthew observed. Should reach the outskirts by evening. As the day waned, the distant silhouette of Denver appeared on the horizon, smoke from countless chimneys rising against the backdrop of mountains beyond. Sophia felt a curious mixture of anticipation and trepidation at the sight. Having second thoughts, Matthew asked, noticing her expression. Not about us, she assured him quickly, just wondering what awaits us there. A fresh start, he said confidently, for both of us. They rode on as the sun began its descent, the city growing larger with each mile. By the time they reached the first scattered buildings of Denver's outskirts, twilight was painting the sky in deepening shades of purple. We should find lodging, Matthew said, eyeing the unfamiliar streets ahead. Proper lodging, he added with emphasis, clearly remembering Sterling. They found a respectable-looking inn near the edge of town, its whitewashed walls and neatly painted signs suggesting cleanliness if not luxury. Matthew dismounted and helped Sophia down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Wait here, he said, tethering the horses to the hitching post. I'll see about rooms. When he returned, his expression was apologetic. Only one room left, he said quietly. But the innkeeper's wife says she can put up a screen for privacy. Sophia hesitated, aware of the impropriety but also of the lateness of the hour and their limited options. I suppose that will have to do, she decided, for tonight. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chair. True to her word, the innkeeper's wife arrived moments later with a folding screen and extra blankets. For the gentleman to make a pallet on the floor, she explained, her tone making it clear she assumed they were properly married. Supper's being served downstairs for another hour if you're hungry. When she had gone, Sophia and Matthew stood awkwardly in the confined space, the intimacy of their situation suddenly overwhelming. I'll wait outside while you freshen up, Matthew offered, then we can go down for supper. Thank you, Sophia said gratefully. Left alone, she quickly washed away the dust of the trail with the provided basin and water pitcher, changed into her cleanest dress, and did her best to tame her travel-worn appearance. The woman who gazed back at her from the small mirror above the washstand looked different somehow, her face more tanned from days in the sun, her eyes brighter despite the fatigue that lingered there. When she opened the door, Matthew was waiting patiently in the hallway. He had clearly made his own efforts to clean up, his hair damp and his face freshly shaved. You look beautiful, he said simply. The dining room downstairs was half full, travelers and locals alike enjoying the plain but hearty fare. They found a quiet table in the corner and ordered the house special roast beef with potatoes and gravy. First real meal in days, Matthew commented as they waited for their food. Feels strange to be sitting at a proper table again. Everything feels strange, Sophia admitted. Being in a city, surrounded by people sleeping indoors, it's as if our time on the trail was a dream. Not a dream, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand briefly, though I'm not opposed to more comfortable accommodations. Their meal arrived, and they ate with the hearty appetite of those who have known hunger. The food was exactly what they needed, filling, savory, and plentiful. By the time they finished, Sophia was struggling to keep her eyes open, the comfort of a real chair and a full stomach conspiring to overcome her. You're exhausted, Matthew observed. Let's get you to bed. Back in their room, the awkwardness returned. Matthew set up his makeshift bed on the floor while Sophia changed into her nightdress behind the screen, the rustle of fabric and creak of floorboards the only sounds between them. Good night, Sophia, he said softly when they had settled into their respective beds, the room dark save for a sliver of moonlight through the curtained window. Good night, Matthew, she replied, already drifting toward sleep. And thank you for everything. His quiet "you're welcome" followed her into dreams. Dawn brought the sounds of a city awakening, wagon wheels on cobblestones, vendors calling their wares, the distant whistle of a locomotive. Sophia woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Morning, Matthew greeted her, already dressed and sitting in the room's single chair. Didn't want to wake you, you were sleeping so peacefully. What time is it? She asked, sitting up and smoothing her hair. Just past 7, he replied. No rush. Thought we'd have a proper breakfast, then see about finding more permanent accommodations. The practicality of his statement brought reality crashing back. They had reached Denver, the goal of their journey. Now they needed to build new lives here separately or together. That remained to be seen. I was thinking about that card, Sophia said, referring to Edward Thornton's offer of employment at the academy. Perhaps I should inquire about the teaching position. Worth looking into, Matthew agreed, and I heard talk downstairs of construction work near the rail yard. Good pay for experienced hands. They spent the morning exploring the city, marveling at its bustling streets and varied establishments. Denver in 1878 was a growing metropolis, still rough around the edges but with increasing signs of civilization, brick buildings rising alongside wooden structures, ladies in fashionable dress sharing sidewalks with miners and cowboys. It's so alive, Sophia observed as they passed a busy market square. So different from Whiteridge. Big enough to get lost in, Matthew agreed, or to start fresh without everyone knowing your business. They found a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Hollister, who had separate rooms available for men and women. The rates were reasonable, the rooms clean if sparse, and the location convenient to both the rail yard and the address on Edward Thornton's card. "It's not much," Matthew said as they stood on the sidewalk outside after securing their accommodations. "But it's a start, a good start," Sophia assured him, excitement building within her despite the uncertainty ahead. "I'll visit the academy this afternoon. Perhaps they'll still have an opening." Matthew nodded, though a shadow crossed his face. "I should check about that construction work," he said. "Meet back here for supper, I'd like that," Sophia smiled. They parted with a lingering glance, the memory of their fireside kiss hovering between them. The Denver Academy for Young Ladies proved to be a handsome 3-story building near the center of town, its brick facade and large windows suggesting prosperity and permanence despite its newness. Sophia approached with trepidation, painfully aware of her travel-worn appearance and lack of references. Edward Thornton received her in a well-appointed office, his surprise at seeing her quickly giving way to pleasure. "Miss," he began, then hesitated. "Nesbit," Sophia supplied, deciding honesty was the best approach. "Sophia Nesbit, Miss Nesbit," he repeated, gesturing for her to take a seat. "I'm delighted you've reconsidered my offer, though I was under the impression you were married." "A misunderstanding," Sophia said carefully. "Mr. Calloway and I were traveling companions only." Mr. Thornton's eyebrow rose slightly, but he made no comment on this revelation. "I see. Well, as I mentioned at the trading post, we are seeking qualified instructors. Do you have experience teaching young ladies specifically?" "I taught at a small school in Colorado for 2 years," Sophia replied. "Boys and girls together, ages 6 to 16. Before that, I completed the teacher training course at the normal school in St. Louis." "Excellent credentials," Thornton nodded approvingly. "And your subjects?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and literature," Sophia listed. "I also offered basic instruction in music for those with interest." "Perfect," Thornton declared. "We are particularly in need of a literature instructor." "Would you be comfortable focusing your teaching in that area?" Sophia's heart leapt. "Nothing would please me more, sir." "Excellent." Thornton opened a ledger on his desk. "Now, as to references," Sophia's stomach clenched. "I'm afraid I left my previous position rather abruptly. I have no formal references to offer." Thornton studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "May I inquire as to the circumstances?" Taking a deep breath, Sophia decided on a version of the truth. "There was a misunderstanding," she said carefully. "False accusations were made against my character by a disappointed suitor. Rather than subject myself to continued gossip, I chose to leave." "I see," Thornton said thoughtfully. "A difficult situation, to be sure." He tapped his fingers on the desk, then seemed to come to a decision. "Miss Nesbit, I pride myself on being a judge of character. You strike me as a woman of intelligence and integrity. I am prepared to offer you a position on a provisional basis 2 months to prove your abilities. After that time, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." Relief flooded through Sophia. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I won't disappoint you." "I don't believe you will," he smiled. "The position includes room and board in the teacher's quarters, plus a modest salary. We open officially in 2 weeks, but instructors are expected to arrive next week to prepare their curricula." "That would be perfect," Sophia said, already mentally planning what she would need. As she left the academy, her steps were lighter than they had been in weeks. A teaching position, and in literature her favorite subject. It seemed too good to be true, a perfect new beginning. Matthew was waiting at the boarding house when she returned, his own expression suggesting good news. "Got the construction job," he announced as soon as he saw her. "Foreman said they need experienced men and they're paying $2 a day." "That's wonderful," Sophia exclaimed. "And I got the teaching position at the academy." "I knew you would," Matthew said, his pride evident. "Told you Denver was the right choice." They celebrated with supper at a small restaurant near the boarding house, sharing their respective plans over plates of chicken and dumplings. The position includes housing at the academy, Sophia explained. I'm to move in next week. Matthew's smile dimmed slightly. So you won't be staying at the boarding house long? No, she admitted, but Denver isn't so large that we can't see each other regularly. Of course, he agreed, though a hint of uncertainty remained in his eyes, and this is a good opportunity for you, exactly what you needed. Sophia reached across the table to touch his hand. This doesn't change anything between us, Matthew. I still want that chance to know you better to see where this might lead, his expression lightened. I want that too, more than anything. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity as they both settled into their new lives in Denver. Matthew began work at the construction site, coming home exhausted but satisfied each evening. Sophia purchased the few necessities she would need at the academy teaching materials: a pair of new dresses suitable for an instructor, personal items to make her quarters feel like home. They spent their evenings together, exploring the city or simply sitting in the boarding house's small parlor, talking long into the night. Their relationship deepened with each passing day, the connection that had begun on the trail growing stronger in the safety of civilization. The evening before Sophia was to move to the academy, they walked along the river that ran through the city, enjoying the relative quiet away from the bustling streets. I have something for you, Matthew said, reaching into his pocket. A going-away present, though you're not going far. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Matthew, Sophia breathed, touched beyond words. It's beautiful. Open it, he urged. Inside was a tiny pressed flower, a wild violet, carefully preserved. I picked it that first morning, he explained. At our first campsite by the creek, reminded me of you, small but strong, beautiful even after a storm. Tears pricked Sophia's eyes as she fastened the chain around her neck. I will treasure it always, she promised. And think of you whenever I wear it. I know we've known each other only a short time, Matthew said, taking her hands in his, but I've never been more certain of anything than I am of my feelings for you, Sophia. Nor I of mine for you, she whispered. He kissed her then, more deeply than that first time by the campfire, his arms encircling her waist as hers wound around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I'll walk you to the academy tomorrow, he promised, and call on you Sunday if that's permitted. It is, Sophia assured him. Teachers are allowed callers on Sunday afternoons. The next morning, Matthew carried her small trunk to the academy as promised, lingering at the entrance as long as possible before reluctantly taking his leave. Sunday, he reminded her, tipping his hat as he turned to go. Sunday, she echoed, touching the locket at her throat. Life at the academy quickly fell into a pleasant rhythm. Sophia found her fellow teachers to be educated, interesting women, and Mr. Thornton proved to be a fair and supportive employer. When classes began, her students, girls ranging from 12 to 18, were eager to learn, their enthusiasm for literature matching her own. Each Sunday, Matthew called at precisely 2 o'clock, hat in hand and usually bearing some small gift: wildflowers, a book from the second-hand store, once even a small cake from the bakery near his boarding house. They would walk through the city parks or visit a terrace, always returning by the academy's strict 5 o'clock curfew. As autumn painted the trees in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, their courtship blossomed. Matthew began attending church with Sophia on Sunday mornings, and occasionally they would meet for a quick supper during the week when her teaching duties allowed. One crisp October afternoon, as they walked through a park near the academy, Matthew seemed unusually quiet. Is something troubling you? Sophia asked, concerned by his pensive mood. Not troubling exactly, he replied, guiding her to a bench beneath a maple tree ablaze with color. Just thinking about the future. Oh, Sophia's heart quickened at his serious tone. Matthew took her hands in his expression earnest. These past months have been the happiest of my life, Sophia. Getting to know you, courting you properly, it's been everything I hoped for and more. For me as well, she assured him. The thing is, he continued, I've been saving my wages. The construction job pays well and I don't spend much. He took a deep breath. I've put down a deposit on a small house near the edge of town, nothing fancy but solid, 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, even a little garden plot out back. Sophia's eyes widened. Matthew, that's wonderful. It needs work, he cautioned, but I can do most of it myself. It could be a home for us. His gaze held hers, hopeful yet uncertain. If you would consider marrying me. Joy bubbled up inside Sophia, bright and effervescent. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. I would be honored to be your wife. Matthew's face transformed with happiness. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest pearl. It was my mother's, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. I've carried it with me always, hoping someday to find a woman worthy of wearing it. It's perfect, Sophia said, tears of happiness brimming in her eyes. Absolutely perfect. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, sweet and full of hope for the future. When they shared their news with Mr. Thornton the following day, he offered his congratulations along with a practical concern. I assume you'll be leaving us after the wedding, Miss Nesbit. I hadn't considered, Sophia admitted, looking to Matthew for guidance. I would never ask Sophia to give up teaching, Matthew said firmly. If the academy would consider keeping her on as Mrs. Calloway, I'd be much obliged, Thornton smiled. We normally prefer unmarried ladies as instructors, but in this case, I'm willing to make an exception. Miss Nesbit, soon to be Mrs. Calloway, has proven herself an exceptional teacher. With that settled, they set a date for December, giving Matthew time to complete the most essential repairs on their new home. The following weeks passed in a flurry of preparations, Sophia sewing a wedding dress with help from the academy's sewing mistress. Matthew working late into the evenings on the house, both of them planning their simple ceremony at the small church they had been attending. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sophia received an unexpected letter forwarded from Whiteridge. The sight of her father's handwriting made her hands tremble as she opened the envelope. My dear daughter, it began, a salutation that immediately brought tears to her eyes. I write to beg your forgiveness for my terrible failure as a father. The truth about Gregory Blackwell has come to light. He was caught in a similar lie about the mayor's daughter, and in his shame confessed to all his falsehoods, including those about you. The town is ashamed, as am I. Your good name has been restored, though I fear too late to bring you home. If you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man's weakness, please write and let me know where you are and how you fare. Your loving father. Sophia sat for a long time with the letter in her lap, emotions washing through her in waves: vindication, anger, grief, and finally, a tentative forgiveness. When she shared the letter with Matthew that evening, his reaction was predictably protective. Too little, too late, he said gruffly. Where was this support when you needed it? He was wrong, Sophia agreed. They all were, but he's still my father and he's trying to make amends. Matthew softened at her obvious distress. Will you write back? Yes, she decided. I'll tell him about you, about our wedding. Maybe someday we could visit. If that's what you want, Matthew agreed, though not without reservation. Though I'm not eager to set foot in Whiteridge again. Nor I, Sophia admitted. But perhaps in time, the wounds will heal enough for reconciliation. As their wedding day approached, the house gradually transformed under Matthew's skilled hands. New paint brightened the exterior, repairs strengthened the roof and floors, and carefully chosen furnishings, simple but well-made, turned the empty rooms into a home. It's beautiful, Sophia declared when Matthew gave her a tour of the completed work 2 days before the wedding. Truly a home to be proud of. Our home, Matthew said, drawing her into his arms, where we'll build our life together. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, a light dusting of snow adding a festive touch to the December landscape. In the small church, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the season, Sophia and Matthew exchanged vows before a congregation made up of their new friends, fellow teachers from the academy, workers from Matthew's construction crew, neighbors who had welcomed them to Denver. I, Matthew, take thee, Sophia. His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. I, Sophia, take thee, Matthew, she responded, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, The kiss they shared was a promise of all that was to come, a lifetime of love born on a dusty trail, where a fleeing woman and a compassionate cowboy had found in each other the home they both had sought. Their wedding supper was held at the academy, Mr. Thornton having generously offered the use of the dining hall for the occasion. After the meal and dancing, the newlyweds departed for their new home, where Matthew carried Sophia across the threshold with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," he said, setting her gently on her feet in their front parlor, where a fire crackled welcomingly in the grate. "It's like a dream," Sophia whispered, taking in the cozy room decorated with a few cherished possessions, her books, his mother's quilt, a wedding gift of fine china from the academy teachers. "After everything, to end up here with you." "Not an ending," Matthew corrected gently, drawing her into his arms. "A beginning." Later, as they lay in each other's arms in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Sophia reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment of perfect contentment. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what might have happened if Gregory Blackwell hadn't lied about me? If I had never fled Whiteridge?" "Sometimes," Matthew admitted, his hand tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "But then I remember that his lie brought you to me. And selfish as it might be, I can't regret anything that led us here." "Nor can I," Sophia agreed, nestling closer to him. "Though I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, it did lead to the greatest joy of my life, you. And to think it all began because a cowboy decided to ride beside a fleeing schoolteacher," Matthew mused. "Without asking why," Sophia added, smiling in the darkness. "That was what gave me hope, even then, that you didn't demand explanations or judge me. You simply offered help when I needed it most." "I saw a woman of courage," Matthew said simply, "riding away from injustice rather than bowing to it. How could I not admire that? And now?" she asked, raising herself on one elbow to look down at him in the moonlight filtering through their curtains. "Now I see my wife," he answered, reaching up to touch her cheek tenderly. "The woman I will love and cherish all the days of my life." As winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, Sophia and Matthew settled into the rhythms of married life. She continued teaching at the academy, coming home each afternoon to their little house where Matthew, having risen to the position of foreman at the construction company, would often be working in the garden or making some new improvement to their home. Sundays were reserved for church, family meals, and long walks through the growing city. They began to put down roots in Denver, forming friendships and becoming part of the community in ways neither had experienced before. In the fall, nearly a year after their wedding, Sophia shared joyful news with her husband. "The doctor confirmed it today," she told him over supper. "We're going to have a baby in the spring." Matthew's face lit with wonder as he gathered her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Our child. Are you pleased?" Sophia asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Pleased doesn't begin to cover it," he said, kissing her soundly. "I'm overjoyed, terrified, grateful, every feeling a man could have all at once." As Sophia's body changed with the growing life within, her father finally accepted their invitation to visit. The reunion was awkward at first, the gulf of past hurts standing between them. But seeing his daughter happy, respected in her community, and loved by a good man gradually softened the older man's reserve. "I was wrong," he admitted on his final evening with them, his voice gruff with emotion. "About everything. You've built a fine life here, Sophia. I'm proud of you." "Thank you, Father," Sophia said, embracing him with genuine affection. "That means more than you know." After he departed, promising to return when the baby arrived, Sophia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. "It's strange," she told Matthew as they prepared for bed that night. "A year and a half ago, I thought my life was over, my reputation destroyed, my future in ruins. Now I have everything I could ever want. A husband I adore, a child on the way, work that fulfills me, a community that values me." "All because you had the courage to leave," Matthew observed, drawing her into his arms, "to ride away from a place that didn't deserve you. And because a cowboy rode beside me, Sophia added, resting her head against his chest, without asking why. Best decision I ever made, Matthew murmured into her hair, following you that day. In May of 1880, their daughter was born a healthy, strong, lunged girl with her father's eyes and her mother's determination. They named her Grace for the blessing she represented in their lives. Standing by the window of their bedroom, Sophia held their sleeping infant while Matthew's arms encircled them both, creating a circle of love and protection. "She's perfect," he whispered, awe evident in his voice as he touched their daughter's tiny hand. "She is," Sophia agreed, leaning back against the solid strength of her husband. "Our new beginning." Outside, spring was painting the world in fresh colors, much as it had been when Sophia fled Whiteridge 2 years earlier. But this time, instead of fear and uncertainty, her heart was filled with hope and joy, the precious gifts that come when one has the courage to ride away from the past and toward a future bright with promise. In the years that followed, their family grew with the addition of a son, Samuel, born 2 years after Grace. The little house expanded as well, with Matthew adding rooms as needed to accommodate their growing family. Sophia eventually became headmistress of the Denver Academy, her wisdom and compassion making her beloved by students and respected by parents. Matthew's construction business thrived, his reputation for quality work and fair dealing spreading throughout the growing city. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, they would sit on their front porch and watch the stars appear, remembering those first nights on the trail when they had begun to know each other beneath the same vast sky. Different circumstances, different lives, but the same two hearts that had recognized in each other a kindred spirit, a perfect match, a love worth riding toward, whatever the cost.